Hello, my name's Jade and today I'm going to be going through all the books that I read in June. I read 9 books in June, although technically I read 10 because I did technically finish Swordcatcher this month, but I reviewed that in my May wrap-up because I read the vast majority of it in May. But anyway, and we have a variety of no, we don't have any plays, that's a complete lie. We have a variety of poetry, fiction and non-fiction today, and we're going to start with a poetry collection. Actually, I don't know if it is a poetry collection. I think it's one long continuous poem, so it's just a poem. And that is Brand New Ancients by K. Tempest. I've read Hold Your Own by K. Tempest, and that one is a Greek myth retelling kind of inspiration type ordeal. It's inspired by the myth of Tiresias, I believe is how you pronounce that person's name. And this one, as you can kind of guess from the title and the cover, has a similar-ish ordeal. This one, Kay kind of imagines how we used to be in our old mythology and our old way of living and kind of compares it with our new ways of living. They compare like class systems and talking about how we're all gods and we're all special and we've gotten into this like really hard place where we're all kind of miserable, or most people are kind of miserable, and we have these like routines and structures and why. There's a lot of questioning of that going on. There are so many quotes in this one I just adored. The gods are all here because the gods are in us. Like, that is very much like the vibe I really like, my favourite part of this poem. And I did really enjoy this poem. I listened to Kay perform it, and listening to them perform it really added something because they kind of sing parts of it and added all these layers, and there was music, and it was really great. If you can find a version of them performing it, I highly recommend it. I loved the themes they interrogated. I thought it was really well written, really well performed. I really like this one. I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. If those kinds of themes sound interesting to you, or if you've been wanting to try K. Tempest and you don't know where to start, I'd recommend this one because I didn't love Hold Your Own. It was okay, but it was just kind of okay for me, but I really enjoyed this one. Like, I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's really, really good. Next up, we have The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I'm so glad to have read another Christina Lauren. I forget how much I miss them when I don't read their rom-coms. Their rom-coms are, I think, my favourite rom-coms. Don't get me wrong, like, I've read a few other authors that I really like as well, but whenever I go back to Christina Lauren, it feels like going home. I listened to this one via audiobook, and it's narrated by Patty Murin and John Root, who both have narrated I believe several Christina Lauren audiobooks. Patty Murin definitely, I think from like In a Holidays onward, she's narrated more or less all of them. I think the exception being The True Love Experiment. This is a really fun premise. So this one is a fake dating. We're following Anna and Liam. They got married while they were at college, but purely for the benefit kind of scheme, for the assisted living and stuff like that. The money, they needed the money, and the only way to get the money was to be married, and so they both needed the help, and so it just worked at the time. They didn't really know each other. They were roommates because they were living together, obviously, and they were kind of friends and stuff, but they didn't know each other that well. Liam, in order to get his inheritance, he has to be married, happily married for 5 years. And so he never technically divorced Anna, although Anna's believed all this time they've been divorced. 5 years later, his sister's getting married, his family's demanding to meet his wife that they've never met, and they're starting to get a bit suspicious, and this will endanger his inheritance. And so he goes to Anna and is like, please, can you pretend to be my wife for my sister's wedding, otherwise I'm going to lose my inheritance. I'll pay you. And she also really needs the money because her dad's really sick and the insurance isn't covering it. And so they fake date on this like tropical island at his sister's wedding. He doesn't get on very well with his family, Liam. They own like a supermarket chain, they're really wealthy, and there's just some bad blood. And this was just the sweetest little thing. It was so fun, it was so cute. I loved the relationship so much. I loved these characters so much, and just, it's kind of like a Grumpy Sunshine type thing. Like, he's really reserved and polite and kind of formal and structured, and she's like a little bit freer, sillier, goofier. They both had such fun personalities. The way they worked together was so good. I just loved everything about the relationship. The sex scenes were great. All of it. I loved all of it. The only problem I have with this one is the way it's structured and the kind of pacing of the plot. It kind of feels quite slow, like not a lot happens, then all of a sudden it's like bum bum bum. It happens quite suddenly, I feel like, the kind of the drama and the climax of it. I wish it was more subtly done. I wish it was, I don't know, it irked me. It feels like because of that it doesn't feel as strong as some of the other Christine Lauren I've read. I feel like it's probably a top 5 for me though. I had so much fun. I cannot stress how much fun I had. I loved the premise, I loved spending time here, I loved the characters, and I loved the relationship. It was so funny and cute. Probably not top 3, but top 5. I'm not entirely sure what I'd rate it, because I need to go back and look at what I've rated other Christine and Lauren and use that to compare. Somewhere between like a 7 and an 8 out of 10 is what I'm thinking right now. Then next up we have a non-fiction, and that is Essex Girls by Sarah Perry. I've been wanting to read this one for a really long time. I went to Hay Festival towards the end of May and I bought it there because Sarah Perry was doing a signing, so I got it signed. And I've been wanting to read this one for a long time. In this accelerating feminist defence of the Essex Girls, Sarah Perry re-examines her relationship with the much maligned home county. Not country. Because I love the idea of kind of interrogating what we think of as an Essex girl. I think it's a really stupid trope. I've known many like Essex women in my life who just kind of prove the trope wrong. Even if there are like some stereotypes that live to be true, that doesn't automatically assume that all of the stereotypes are true. And I think so many of them are just needlessly negative and nasty. For profane and opinionated women everywhere. I love the sound of it, and she was there so I picked it up. And it was super short. I think it was really well written. Sarah Perry is so articulate. When she spoke at the event, I could not believe like the words that were coming out of her mouth, just like free form. Very well spoken. It's very well written. It's just not what I imagined it to be. Like I imagined it to be kind of exploring the Essex girl and these tropes and in defense of. It's more kind of a summarized history of different Essex women and kind of through them proving how these tropes are wrong. It does look a little bit about Sarah's own relationship with Essex girls and with Essex in general. I would have perhaps liked if she did it a little bit more. I don't know, I was expecting it to be something very different, so that kind of warped my opinions of it. Had I known it was more of like a summarized history of Essex women, maybe I could have like tapered my expectations. So because of that, I'm gonna give it more like a 7 out of 10, but I do think it's really well done. And I do still recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. Next up, we have a good one. We have The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. This is the 3rd and final book in the Wolf Den trilogy. The first one being The Wolf Den, the second one being The House with the Golden Door. I will link the videos where I discuss both of them in the description. Long story short, I loved both of those books individually on their own merit. This trilogy was definitely on like on the road to becoming one of my favourite trilogies, and I do think it's one of my favourite trilogies. I think it's up there. I didn't love this last book as much as I loved the first 2 books. So the premise is we're following Amara. She's enslaved and she works in a brothel and she's trying to get herself out of this situation. But there's also the relationship she has with like her enslaver, for instance, and like the other women of the brothel, and then the relationship she forms trying to get out of the brothel. They're also nuanced and interesting, and I really loved the way it was written. It felt really cool and crisp. The writing in this one felt a little bit on the nose. Too cool and crisp, like we'd lost the descriptiveness of it a little bit. Emotions were just stated rather than like described, for instance. It's been so long since I read the first 2 that I can't really compare it. Like I can't fully remember the writing in those 2s. If like this one is different, or if like my taste has just changed over time, if I just noticed it in this one and I didn't in the first 2, I don't know what's going on. The plot of this one, you might be able to tell by the cover. It has a very different feeling. All 3 books in this trilogy have very different feelings from this one. This one has like more action, definitely. And so it kind of, the way it came about, I wasn't quite expecting. It literally happens at the very beginning of a chapter. I was expecting it to be like interrupting something. But I do think like the more action-packed part of this book was well written. I loved the ending. I was very satisfied by it. I felt all the emotions. And I read through this so quickly. I was so absorbed by it. I love the characters. I'm so invested in the story as a whole that even though I have like a couple little bugbears with it, I still really, really, really enjoyed this one. If anything else, I'm just like more frustrated that I didn't find it as flawless and amazing as I found the first 2, because I adored the first 2. I gave them both 9s out of 10. I thought they were so strong, and this one just lacked like that a little bit. Still give it an 8 out of 10. I still think it's a really satisfying, very well done end to the trilogy. It just doesn't live up to the first 2, which is so frustrating. Next up, we have another one of my most anticipated releases of this year, and that is Better by Far by Hazel Hayes. Hazel Hayes wrote Out of Love, which I read a couple years ago now. I'll link the video where I discuss it down below, but I adored Out of Love as well. I gave this one a 9 out of 10 as well. I thought it was so well done. You think about it all the time. In this one, we're following Kate. She breaks up with her boyfriend Finn. Well, they mutually break up, and they just started this lease on this house together, and neither of them can really afford to live by themselves, and so they kind of end up deciding to live there 1 week on, 1 week off. So 1 week Kate will live there, then Finn, then Kate, then Finn, and we're just following Kate going through the motions of getting over him and through like the breakup cycles. She lost her mother when she was pretty young, and she's kind of had like nightmares and a lot of trauma around that her whole life. And with this breaking up of Finn, it kind of like really rears its head, and she kind of has to re-reckon with it. She writes very sad books, Hazel. They're both about breakups. Both of them destroyed me a little bit. They're very different in feeling. I think both of them because they're written so differently. Out of Love is a love story told in reverse, basically, so it has a more experimental feel, whereas this one feels like we're right there with Kate going through the ugly emotions. It feels more kind of stream of consciousness. I love her writing. I think it's so beautiful. I think it's so vivid and real. I remember saying this about Out of Love as well. It feels like poetic and beautiful, but also just like the awful gritty truth and just like the mundanity of like day-to-day life. It all feels very real. And there were so many lines that I was like, yes, this. I underlined so much of this, as I did with Out of Love. I think they're just both so well written. The themes are really well grappled with. I do think the themes of this one were a little bit more on the nose. I think in Out of Love they were a little subtler. That's the only criticism I can think of with this one though. Really enjoyed it. I teared up a few times. I really became attached to our characters. I became attached to the relationship. It's so interesting reading a character going through a breakup, because objectively you know they should be broken up, and yet I kept finding myself yearning for them to like get back together, even though logically I know they should be broken up. But that in itself, just that whole like, it kind of led down like these different thought experiments and opened up so many questions and ideas for me. I'm so glad to have read both of them. I'd also give Better by Far a 9 out of 10. I listened to this one via audiobook as well. It was narrated by Hazel herself. She narrated both of them, and she did a fantastic job narrating both of them. So if you're looking for an audiobook and either of these sounds interesting to you, cannot recommend it more. Next up, we have another non-fiction book, and that is We Need to Talk by Celeste Headley, How to Have Conversations That Matter. Again, I think I kind of went into this expecting it to be something slightly different to what it is, although in hindsight I also think my initial response to it might have been a bit harsh. This, I mean, it kind of is what it says on the tin. Take a moment to consider how many outcomes in your life may have been affected by poor communication skills. Journalist Celeste Headley has interviewed hundreds of people from all walks of life, and if there's one thing she's learned, it's that it's hard to overestimate the power of conversation. She outlines the strategies that have made her a better conversationalist and offers simple tools that can improve anyone's communication. Which, to be fair, I did like the practical advice in this. I do think there is a good amount. Initially, definitely find a lot of it kind of to be just common sense. A lot of it was stuff that I've already talked about with other people, or stuff I've kind of already heard elsewhere. Like the importance of saying I don't know, for instance. Like, I've never wanted to shy away from saying I don't know that, because I'm very aware there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm also so terrified of saying like, oh yeah, this thing, and then being proven wrong. Anyway, that's just one very small example of like something that I already knew and felt like was common sense, but maybe it's not common sense. I don't know. As you can see from the tabs, there were some things that I thought were valuable in here. I feel like what I wanted was like how to be more articulate, how to be brave enough to things you're too scared to say, how to deal with confrontation. Like, I think that what I have in mind are more niche problems, whereas this is kind of a broad sweeping, like how to have a conversation in general, and just like tips and tricks to be a better communicator. And I do think it does that well. There are also some really interesting facts and figures, studies that she mentions, and some quotes that were interesting to know. And I think it's a good starting point for non-fiction about communication / conversations. It's really about conversation, not so much about communication. It's very accessible. I listened to the audiobook for this one as well. Again, it's narrated by the author. She did a great job. Easy to listen to, if a little bit dry at times. Like, how interesting and entertaining can a book about the very basics of conversation be? I don't know. It didn't wow me. It didn't floor me. It was good, not great in my opinion. I think I'd give this one like somewhere, like initially I was thinking very much 6 out of 10, but then I feel like that might be harsh because it did what it was set out to do well. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Then next up is a fiction book, and that is The Atlas Paradox by Oliver Blake, the second book in the Atlas 6 trilogy. My reading was just really all over the place this month. There is no rhyme or reason. Literally, this one I was like, yeah, I could read a fantasy. How about the Atlas Paradox? Like, I'm in the mood for something like dark academia-ish. Because I've been putting this one off for a while, as soon as like I had the inkling of like, yeah, I could read that, I was like, yeah, okay, let's read it now before I put it off another 100 times. I really wanted to reread the Atlas 6 before I reread this one, and then I came to realise that's why I kept putting it off, because I couldn't summon the energy to reread the Atlas 6. I love Oliver Blake's books, but they do have a dense feeling to them, especially the Atlas 6 books, and I like the font, I'm pretty sure, is smaller than the font in her other books, and I don't appreciate that. Did enjoy this one. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed the Atlas 6. I think it kind of has middle book syndrome. It felt kind of fillery. I didn't feel like it had much of a direction, but then at the same time, the Atlas 6 is a more literary novel of ideas, exploration, loose. Like, it's not like your regular fantasy, like magical realism. And Oliver Blake's books in general aren't, but like her other books that I've read from her at least, there's a firm plot there, there's a firm mission. Whereas this series, I think as well, the fact that it spans over 3 books and it's really elongated and we take our time exploring these things. End goal? I mean, for a start, I'm not even sure I fully know what it is. I don't fully know where I nor my characters stand. Something very big happened at the end of... A couple of very big things happened actually at the end of the Atlas 6. Some things were revealed, some things happened, and then it just kind of was prolonged throughout this entire book, like what we're gonna do about it and like how we feel. And like some of the things I feel like our characters still don't really know, like they kind of know but they don't really know, and it's a little bit stressful. And like I said, I don't fully know who to trust and who to decide to be on and what's going on. I'm confused. All this to say, because it was so prolongated, I did find myself getting a little bit like bored at times, like just wondering where it was going. I found it a little bit slow, a little bit dense. On the whole though, I enjoyed it. On the whole, it didn't feel like too much of a slog. It just happened a couple of times because like, where are we going here? And it felt like even the things we were exploring, like these like grand ideas and philosophies and things, they made sense to me. I feel like I got confused in the Atlas 6 a few times. They made more sense to me. Like I felt the magic system, it all felt more tangible. I just didn't know how much I cared. The vibes are so good and the characters are so good and the writing is fantastic. It does have a little bit of like a pretentious feeling to it, but I love that. I think it works with the genre so well. It's so stinking beautiful and lyrical, but at the same time, like, we dip into our characters' heads and it'd be written like no, like no spaces, and these little like comedic intrusions that are just so good. They're so good. I love her writing so much. I love her characters so much. Period. Across all the books of hers that I've read. Just feel like the plot of the Atlas 6 and the direction of the Atlas 6 was a little bit stronger. We had a clear goal in sight, whereas in this one, we had a goal, but it was very loose and it took them a very long time to do it, and not everyone was on board with that goal anyway. And then we had like the second thing that was introduced in the end of the first book, and like how much we were actually touching base with that and how much our characters learned about that and came to decide where they're going to stand on it. It all felt very loosey-goosey to me, and again, that fits the vibe of this story very well. I just don't know how I feel about it. But I think it's because it's the middle book. I really hope and feel like the Atlas Complex I won't have this problem with. Well, things will be resolved. They'll have to be resolved. It's the last book. I don't think it's as good as the Atlas 6. I don't... Like, my favourite book by Oliver Blake is Masters of Death, and it remains to be Masters of Death. Probably enjoyed it more than One for My Enemy, I'll give it that. And I did enjoy One for My Enemy as well, so that's not to say that, like, I enjoyed all of her books. I cannot stress this enough. I wish some more things happened. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. I felt like, very much like that book, I had a lot of feelings and didn't say anything coherently at all. Which is pretty much the whole basis of those books. Next one is a non-fiction, and that is Buy Yourself Fucking Lillies and Other Rituals to Save Your Life from Someone Who's Been There by Tara Schuster. So this is more of like a general self-help book. I saw someone else that I'm following on Goodreads read this, and I love the cover and the title so much. I was like, yeah, I want to see what that's about. Speaking of practical advice with We Need to Talk, this one does that fantastically. So it's kind of, again, it's what it says on the tin. By the time she was in her late 20s, Tara Schuste was a rising TV executive and by all appearances had mastered being a grown-up. Beneath that veneer of success, she was a chronically anxious, self-medicating mess. And so it's about how she kind of crawled her way out of this, like, depression that she found herself into and all these ways in which she was unhappy, becoming a genuinely happy, functioning, well-rounded person, essentially. And she now does a lot of self-help stuff. She's big on journaling. She does a lot of journaling prompts. There's so many journaling prompts in here. I've never gotten on with journaling, but I'm gonna give it a go. But there's so much, like, tangible advice, like, sit down, write a list of these things, sit down and think about this. And she kind of goes through so many different, like, aspects of our lives. Mind rituals, the body rituals, and the relationship rituals. So she really breaks it all down, and there's so many, like, ideas and prompts. But not only that, but it's also really entertaining and funny. Like, all of her personal anecdotes, like, it's kind of memoir style, very relatable, and she's just very funny. I laughed a lot reading this one. I listened to this one via audiobook as well. It was narrated by Tara, and again, she did a fantastic job. And I think, like, hearing it come from her did make it, like, that a little bit funnier and make me connect with it that a little bit more. So I definitely recommend the audiobook. I'm definitely going to come back to this one in the future and go through these exercises and read through these, like, things again. I underlined a ton. I tabbed a ton. It feels really cheesy, and it is a little bit cheesy, and some of it does kind of feel like, well, how much does that really work? But then at the same time, I feel like the people saying that aren't the people that have really given it a full-hearted go. I mean, and it's a lot of similar advice that you see elsewhere, to be honest. Like, a lot of this wasn't necessarily new information, it was just presented in a different way, or approached in a different way, or told to me in a way that felt more believable and reachable and attainable for me. I want to give it a go now. She's made me want to give it a go. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10 as well. And then our last book of the month is another fiction book. Again, we flopped completely different genre again. And that is Instructions for a Heatwave by Maggie O'Farrell. I think after Better by Far, I was craving another kind of, like, literary feeling book. Maggie O'Farrell just, I think, I have a feeling all of her books are just literary and feeling. I've only read 4. 3 of them I've read this year. I'm on something of a Maggie O'Farrell cruel binge, if you will. Really hope I get to another book of hers this year, because I really loved it, and I've loved all the other books of hers that I read. I read Hamnet earlier this year. Adored it. I'll leave the link to where I discussed that one below. In that same month, I also read I Am by her, which is her non-fiction memoir type book. So if you want to hear my thoughts and feelings on those, videos in the description. I've also read The Marriage Portrait by her, which I read last year. Again, videos links in the description. So this one's slightly different. Like, The Marriage Portrait and Hamnet are very much like a historical fiction set a long time ago. This one is labelled as historical fiction. It's set in the 70s and it was written, like, I think over 10 years ago. So I wouldn't label this as historical fiction. I would label it as, like, literary contemporary, maybe mystery. July 1976, and London is in the grip of a heat wave. Robert Warden tells his wife Greta that he's going round to the corner to buy a newspaper, then doesn't come back. And this is really out of character for him. He's never done anything like this before. Because of Robert going missing, all of the children of Greta and Robert kind of living their very different messy lives have to come home, and we're very much spending time with each of these family members apart from Robert, and we're looking at their lives and, like, the messes they're in, and we're just that's it we're trying to figure out where Robert went, but we're also looking at these people and, like, the messes that they're in and their relationships with one another, and it's great. Maggie O'Farrell's writing, again, just so good. It's so beautifully written, like, so descriptive, and this very, like, controlled, delicate way, but yet it also feels really simple. Like, it never felt too flouncy or over the top. It felt very measured and grounded, but beautiful. Her characters are really complicated and nuanced, and they just feel so real, and the way they're explored is so subtle. Like, it's kind of the opposite of what I was saying earlier about Elodie Harper and Temple of Fortuna. It's all, like, reading between the lines, description that we can just, like, gain and gather for ourselves. Very much kind of like unreliable narrators. Like, they all were very much in all of their different headspaces in the way that they view the world, knowing that, like, this might not be the objective truth. I mean, the romance for Robert does kind of take a backseat to these people's lives, but I was fine with that. Irish Times said the Riordans will stay in your mind long after you finish the book. They're funny, infuriating, and impossible not to love. They feel like family. I grew so attached to them by the end. It was like, I didn't even realise I started, like, tearing up at the end just because it was the end. I flew through it. I was completely addicted to it. I could not wait to read it every night. It was so well written. It's a very enjoyable read. I cannot say enough good things, clearly. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It It was fantastic. And those were all the books I read in June. If you've read any of these and you have any thoughts or opinions, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. What was your favourite book that you read in June? I think mine might have been Instructions for Heatwave or Better by Far. One of them. I feel like they're like a tie in my mind. And that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!